Waco ISD is the home of 6 of the best student historians in the nation. Hello again, everybody. My name is Dale Caffey with another in a series of interviews highlighting the 4 products that made it all the way from the Atlas Academy at Waco ISD to College Park, Maryland, and National History Day competition. I am so pleased to be joined by Harper Hoover. She is a student at the Atlas Academy, and she did an individual junior level student performance, and it was about Dorothea Lange, a famous photographer back during the Great Depression, I believe.
Yes.
Fantastic. Congratulations to you, Harper.
Thank you.
Talk to me a little bit about how you chose to do something on Dorothea Lange, because I'm going to show you my ignorance. I'd never heard of her before seeing your performance.
Well, in 3rd grade, in our Gifted and Talented program at Hillcrest, we were pulled out, and as the spring semester, we focused on working on the Dust Bowl, and so we learned about how the Great Depression affected the farmers in the Great Plain area. And part of our research was seeing some of the photographs of Dorothea Lange and how they affected the Farm Security Administration, their choices to help not only migrant workers, but also the farmers that were suffering in the Dust Bowl. And then in 5th grade, when we learned about the Great Depression again, we revisited Dorothea Lange's photographs and her life as well. We did a little bit of a biography of her. And so when I heard that the theme was leadership and legacy for this year, I automatically thought of the legacy part, and I suddenly remembered all of these photographs that we had learned about in the 3rd grade and 5th grade. And then I remembered a small little name, Dorothea Lange, and I looked her up, and with only a few website sources just to confirm who she was, I knew that she was a leader, and I knew that she was a legacy. And reading more about her, I became very interested in her life, and that brought me to do all this research about her and to make my project about her.
Very good. Now, you chose to do also a performance as opposed to a display board or a student paper or something like that. Why did you choose to do the performing?
I love to do theater so much. I've been doing church musicals since 1st grade, and obviously Showtime in 4th and 5th grade, that really brought on my love of theater. And so a stage or a classroom, in the case of our competition, it just feels so natural to be talking in front of people and to be doing a performance. And I'm not that good with technology, to be honest, so I kind of ruled out a documentary or website. And exhibitor paper, I love to be creative in those ways as well, but I really knew that a performance was what I was comfortable with doing, and also it was a challenge I really wanted to take on.
Obviously, there's a lot of research involved. First, you have to get to know the character better and better, and you said that you actually first started knowing about her back in elementary years. But once you do the research, then you sort of have to say, okay, how am I going to write a script to tell her story? And you do a very good job. How do you do that?
The first thing you have to come up with is an outline. So you decide what characters you're going to be and then when you're going to talk about. And so I decided I wanted to start out to be Diana Taylor, who I actually interviewed, and who is the granddaughter of Dorothea Lange. Just to kind of get the ball rolling and get an introduction to who Dorothea is without jumping right into her character. And then I decided, since it was about mostly her life and her career, that I wanted to do it chronologically. And so instead of like every little date and every little year, I chose big chunks of like the eras of her life. So her early work as a portrait photographer, her migrant work, her Japanese internment, and then her later life. And so after her later life, I knew I wanted to focus on leadership and legacy and just make a big chunk of my performance that talked about how she relates to the theme and how she relates to today. So that was when I brought Diana back in, and how she not only is a leader with a legacy to people like us, but how she also is very impactful on Diana's life.
And of course, then you have to create a set that's relatively easy to put up and take down because you have a time limit on getting this thing done. So tell me a little bit about your set design.
Well, last year I had a huge set, and at the beginning of this year, myself and my family kind of agreed we need a small set. But obviously simple was not the goal this year. And so how I chose to do the set, I had seen pictures of her studio online, and she had a desk and like windows in front of it, and she would put up pictures to look at them while she was developing them and while she was making exhibits to see which pictures kind of went with where. And so I knew that I wanted to show her life and to show her career, and I thought where she made her career and where she had all this work and where she lived, her studio would be the best part to do that. And so that's where the table and the chair came in, and then the front side of my set that was the studio side. But then also part of the legacy part at the end, I wanted to show her pictures, obviously not just the little 4x6 on the studio ones, but I wanted to really show what her work would look like in a museum and how big and how impactful her work is. And so I recreated a museum on the other side that had my title on the top of it, and then it had the pictures that were in her Museum of Modern Art exhibit. So those were a few that were in there. And so the first side was more about her career and her life, and then the second side was about her legacy.
You also have a time limit, I believe, at this. Is it 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. So when you first do the script and it's a little bit over, do you have to do some cutting here and there? And does your mom or your teacher ever get nervous about, you know, you're at 9:59 when they stop the stopwatch?
Yes, the first time when I write it or rewrite it, in fact, like when I'm at the school level, when I write it for the first time, I time it just talking through it, and it usually ends up about 15 to 20 minutes. So that's where the cutting comes in, where you have to cut every single sentence and every single paragraph that isn't the most important part about your character. But then even once you get it to the bare minimum, it starts getting like 10:05, 10:10. I mean, sometimes it would be a few days before the competition where I was sweating because I was over 10 minutes. Right. And it doesn't disqualify you, but the judges definitely rank you down when you're over the time. And so there were many a times when I would cut out sentences like 3 days before, or I would just run it as fast as I could. Right now it usually runs about 9:45, 9:50, which is where you want to be. But I definitely have to cut last minute, and adrenaline usually speeds it up, but there's a lot of stress when it comes to being over the time.
Very good. Well, we're going to break away from this interview right now and let the folks at home see how great your performance is. So let's look at Harper Hoover as Dorothea Lange, the lady behind the lens.
Behind the Lens, The Leadership and Legacy of Dorothea Lange by Harper Hoover. While there is perhaps a province in which the photograph can tell us nothing more than what we see with our own eyes, there is another in which it proves to us how little our eyes permit us to see. Dorothea Lange, an American photographer, showed her country the truth when they needed to see it the most. Her leadership gave hope to the suffering people of the Great Depression, and her legacy lives today in honest pictures that teach us how to see the unseen. My name is Diana Taylor, and I'm thrilled you could join me here in my grandmother's studio. Before she passed away, my grandmother began working on her memoir, and recently I've taken it on as a project to edit and eventually publish. Dorothea Lange's life was filled with adventure, inspiration, and truth. And as I reread the words she's written here, it's as if I can hear my grandmother's voice telling me again of the extraordinary life she led. The dawning of the 1920s marked the official beginning of my career. However, my career truly began when I was in high school, after I told my mother I wanted to be a photographer. Of course, she had little faith in my decision, as I had never used a camera before, and truthfully, this was an unacceptable job for women at the time. Determined to follow my dream and begin my life as an adult, I took some photography classes and headed to San Francisco. I first worked a job processing film at a drugstore, but soon after, I was given a studio in an apartment building where I took portraits of people and their families. The arrival of the Great Depression brought decline in my business, so to save my career, I made money by taking pictures of my surroundings. I would walk to local soup kitchens and photograph the lines of hungry men or the mended stockings of women. These images represented the true hardships of the times. One of my photographs, White Angel Breadline, caught the attention of Paul Taylor, who began my career as a documentary photographer with his influence and support. Around the 1930s, Paul invited me to take pictures of migrant workers. Through our work together, we fell in love and married, but that's a longer story. In the migrant camps, I shot photos of people living in shacks and picking peas for what you couldn't even call a livelihood. The conditions I witnessed seemed unbearable for the workers, and Paul and I became compelled to do more than watch. We managed to fund the build of 15 camps with our own donations. I also used my photography as a way to create awareness. I traveled to many affected areas to capture the lives of the farmers in hopes to convince Americans to help out. Paul showed my photography to Roy Stryker, who is head of the new media branch for the Resettlement Administration. As a part of Roosevelt's New Deal, the Resettlement Administration, later renamed the Farm Security Administration, was created in order to aid the Agricultural Society of America. Roy hired me and many other photographers, such as Walker Evans and Marion Post Wolcott, to record the conditions of these farmers. The FSA sent my photographs on to legislators to convince them that the migrant workers deserved improvements in the livability of the camps. Through my work, laws were changed and the camps became cleaner, safer, and the number of them expanded greatly. In 1936, I took one of my most famous photographs, Migrant Mother, which many people consider the face of the Great Depression. This was the turning point for my work because it caught not only the government's attention, but the citizens of America's as well. My photography with the migrant workers was an inspiration to America because it did things that photography before had rarely done. It prodded my audience to not only look, but to see, and then to act. The American citizens' response was one of the first in a chain reaction that led to equality for all fields of work, even the pea fields. I continued my work with the FSA until the bombing of Pearl Harbor. After the declaration of war on Japan on December 8, 1941, people began to grow uneasy about those of Japanese heritage in America. So the government told these people to pack their bags and move to internment camps where it could be ensured that they weren't a threat. The War Relocation Authority asked me to document the camps. However, I was instructed not to take pictures of guards, watchtowers, punishment, or anything controversial, really. Even with the limitations, I managed to show the disturbing images I saw. I showed children with solemn faces, not able to fully comprehend what was happening to them. I showed families being torn apart. One of my favorite pictures that I took was of the Japanese children saying the American pledge, because to me, it showed that these children were just as American as those who had imprisoned them. I'd like to think that I led people to defend the minorities, or that I left a legacy of fighting for justice for all, but I'm not sure. My photographs weren't released until many years later due to the fact that the content was considered questionable. I was fired, and I was glad. Some people refuse to see the truth, but I've come to terms with that. With the end of the Great Depression and World War II, I focused on photographing the faces of America throughout the 50s and 60s. I photographed mothers, families, and pioneers. I took photographs wherever I could, determined to still inspire people. However, last year, in 1964, I was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. I can no longer do many of the things I want to. But I have one more project left. The Museum of Modern Art has asked me to create an exhibit for them. I have much work ahead of me. To live a visual life is an enormous undertaking, practically unattainable. I have merely touched it, just touched it. Though my grandmother finished her exhibit, Dorothea Lange passed away 3 months before it opened. The Museum of Modern Art temporarily displayed a collection that showed the American spirit in its finest, most beautiful ways. But my grandmother didn't need to see her exhibit to know how she changed the world and became a leader in her field. Her photography taught her audience to see the world as it is, raw and exposed. The message she delivered through her photographs brought justice to the unspoken and taught us how to see ourselves and each other. These impactful, emotional images led Americans to improve the living and working conditions of the migrant workers. Her exposure of the Japanese and the internment camps eventually led to a formal national apology to the Japanese Americans on August 10, 1988, in the Civil Liberties Act. Dorothea Lange's work led to a new era of documentary photography. Without her work, the countless instances of injustice may have never been revealed, and thus resolved. Without the influence of Lange on her audience, we might still be blind to the suffering of our times. However, Dorothea Lange wasn't and shouldn't be defined by her work. Dorothea had the courage to defy several of the associations she worked for because of her belief in equality. Contrary to her gender, Lange stood out in a photographic community dominated by men. She was the first woman awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship Award and the first woman photographer to display a solo exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. She is an inspiration to female and male photographers today, aching to show the truth. Her legacy is in the fearless photographers of the 21st century who continue to fight for justice and break barriers, as she did so gracefully. She powered through the struggle of being left with a limp her entire life and overcame her rough childhood. Dorothea Lange's courage made her a strong leader, and her photographs are her undying legacy. You know, one of my favorite quotes from my grandmother is, "One should use a camera as though tomorrow you'd be stricken blind." Dorothea Lange used her camera as if tomorrow would never come, capturing images no one else was brave enough to share. And thankfully, I've come to realize that I am very lucky to have known and loved the person behind the lens.
Harper, that was simply outstanding. Great job. It was so good. You know, I couldn't help but, as I'm looking at this performance, thinking about the Grapes of Wrath for some reason, because of the Dust Bowl and the looks on some of the faces of the people who were going through tough times. As you did this, did you have the same feelings as you were looking at some of the photography that Dorothea actually produced?
Well, I didn't necessarily go to Grapes of Wrath when I thought of that,
right.
Though my dad tried to convince me to watch it, but it didn't work out. But anyway, so I definitely got an idea of what the Depression was like, and when I saw all of her photographs going through her archives, I remembered everything about the Great Depression that I absolutely loved to learn about. And so it definitely gave me an idea of what the era was like, and it definitely reminds me of the Great Depression and what really went on that time.
Very good. You ever get nervous when you were doing this? You know, you first started out at the campus level, but then the first really competition was at Baylor, then you advanced to state and then on to national competition. You ever get nervous before this thing?
Last year at my first year of doing an individual performance, I honestly wasn't nervous at all at the school and regional level. I mean, I was nervous before I did it that I would mess up or something, but I wasn't nervous about going on. But this year it was cutthroat competition everywhere we went. It was always, after I performed, I was getting a little shaky, like, will I go on? How will it turn out? Things like that. But then before my performance, I always just have to like get my alone time, and I just sit outside the classroom or wherever we're performing, just running it through my head and just like focusing on breathing and things like that. And I kind of have a tradition of not eating, which usually it's in the morning, but I don't eat before history fair performances. Right. So.
Well, I was going to say that as you're doing your performance, it's important for the people to know that that's not the end of it, because after you perform, there's a Q&A between the judges and yourself. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So after you perform, you have to get all of your set out of the way and into the holding room or in the hallway or wherever it was beforehand. And then the judges get to ask you a series of questions about your bibliography, your performance, your topic, how you did your research, all things like that. So you're standing in front of the 3 judges or the 2 judges or the 4 judges, and you get kind of nervous, like, will they ask me something I know? Will it be like easy, like, oh, I got this? Or will it be something about something I haven't even researched and they know about but I don't know anything about? So you have to just focus on what you know and what you can talk about. And if you don't necessarily know what they're talking about, you just kind of try to answer it quickly, and then you drag their attention and talk about something else that you do know.
A good technique, but they're trying to make sure that you did the research.
Yes.
And instead of just memorizing somebody else's script. And so I know that that would be the part of the competition that I would dread the most, is trying to answer those questions. But certainly you did a good job, because I believe you finished 10th in the nation, is that right? Top 10 in the nation, folks. That's a lot of people. I believe 500,000 students across the U.S. start out competing in History Fair, and only the select few get to go to College Park, Maryland to compete at national competition. How does it feel to be in the top 10 in the nation?
Well, my goal this year was to get 3rd in state, just because I wasn't really ready to go to nationals and I felt my project wasn't the absolute best it could be at state. And so when I found out that I was going to nationals, it kind of dawned on me, wow, this is like a totally different new experience I'm going to. And so my goal, I actually didn't really have a goal at nationals. It was just to kind of have fun and learn what it would be like, so next year I could do really well. And so when I found out that I made it to the finals and that I was secured in the top 14 of the nation, I was absolutely ecstatic. And then when I found out that I wasn't, you know, like 14 or 13 or something like that, I was even more happy. But it was very hard competition, and I definitely learned a lot that I will use next year to hopefully do better.
That's right, because Harper is only a 7th grader, or finished her 7th grade year, now going into 8th grade at the Atlas Academy. Got to put in another plug for Atlas. How did it feel like to go up to College Park, Maryland, not by yourself, but with 5 friends, all of whom were competing?
It definitely was very exciting. It wasn't necessarily like going to state or regionals where you have a lot more people from Atlas, but I was very happy that I wasn't going alone, or that I was only going with one other person. And it was such a great experience to be surrounded by my friends and to do a bunch of things that we wanted to do and learn more about each other.
Very good. Harper Hoover, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Fantastic performance. Once again, this is Harper Hoover from the Atlas Academy with her award-winning Dorothea Lange production. My name is Dale Caffey, and I'm with one of the learners of today and leaders of tomorrow.